The millionaire thought he knew his house well, until he heard the cries of babies coming from behind a locked door. When he broke it down, he found the young cleaning lady in despair, holding her children in her arms, unable to understand the reason for the punishment. He demanded an explanation from his wife, and what he discovered left him in shock. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The heavy doors of Mitchell Enterprises swung closed behind Alexander Mitchell as he stepped into the crisp Boston autumn air. The skyline of financial district buildings stood tall against the fading daylight, each one a testament to power, wealth, and ambition. Many of those buildings belonged to him, a real estate empire he'd inherited from his father and expanded tenfold in the 15 years since. A sleek black Bentley pulled up, and his driver nodded respectfully as Alexander slid into the back seat. He loosened his tie, feeling the familiar weight of isolation settle on his shoulders. At 45, Alexander had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. 3 years ago, a private plane carrying his wife Catherine and their 7-year-old son James had disappeared over the Atlantic. The investigation concluded with words like catastrophic mechanical failure and no survivors, but for Alexander, the world simply stopped turning that day. "Home, sir?" the driver asked, the same question he asked every evening. Alexander checked his watch and frowned. "No, Thomas. Take me to the Bay Village property first, the one on Winchester Street." The apartment building on Winchester Street was a recent acquisition, a modest 3-story brick building in a gentrifying neighborhood. His property manager had informed him that an occupant in apartment 2B was 3 months behind on rent, and despite multiple notices, had made no effort to arrange payment. Normally, Alexander wouldn't personally handle such matters, but tonight, he needed a distraction from the emptiness of his Beacon Hill mansion. As the car pulled to a stop, Alexander straightened his silk tie and buttoned his tailored suit jacket. "Wait here," he told Thomas. "This shouldn't take long." The building's entrance had a security door with an intercom system. He pressed 2B and waited, rehearsing the words he would say. Firm, professional, unemotional. He was simply here to inform the tenant that eviction proceedings would begin tomorrow unless immediate payment was arranged. When no one answered, he used his master key. The narrow hallway was clean but worn, the carpet showing paths of frequent use. At apartment 2B, he knocked sharply on the door. From inside came the sound of small, quick footsteps and a child's voice saying, "I'll get it, Mommy." Alexander frowned. His property manager hadn't mentioned a child. The door opened just a crack. Secured by a chain lock, and a small face peered up at him. A girl of about 5 with golden curls and startlingly blue eyes that reminded him painfully of James. She clutched a well-worn teddy bear with a missing eye and a carefully stitched tear across its belly. "Hello," the child said with surprising confidence. "Are you the landlord, man?" Before Alexander could answer, a woman's voice called from inside. "Emma, what did I say about opening the door?" The door closed briefly, the chain rattled, and then it opened fully to reveal a young woman in her early 30s. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Despite the shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes, there was a quiet dignity in the way she stood. "I'm Sarah Parker," she said, extending her hand. "And you must be Mr. Mitchell. I've been expecting someone from your office." Alexander shook her hand automatically, momentarily thrown by the direct approach. "Alexander Mitchell. I own the building." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "The owner himself?" She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "Please come in. I know why you're here, and I'd rather discuss this without the whole building listening." The apartment was small but meticulously clean. A few cardboard boxes were stacked in one corner, and the furniture was minimal. A worn sofa, a coffee table, and a small dining set. On the refrigerator hung children's artwork, colorful crayon drawings of sunshine and stick figures. "Emma, sweetie, go play in your room for a few minutes while I talk to Mr. Mitchell," Sarah said. The child looked between them, her eyes serious. "Is he here about the money, Mommy? Is he going to make us leave?" Sarah knelt down to her daughter's eye level. "Grown-ups need to talk." "It'll be okay." The girl clutched her teddy bear tighter and turned to Alexander. "Mr. Landlord Man, please don't make us leave. I'll give you Teddy if you let us stay. He's my best friend, but you can have him." She held out the ragged bear, her small hand trembling slightly but her gaze steady. The simple, selfless gesture hit Alexander with unexpected force, as though someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. "Emma," Sarah whispered, embarrassment and heartbreak mingling in her voice. Alexander knelt down, bringing himself to the child's level. "That's very generous of you, but I couldn't take your friend from you." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, gentler than it had been in years. "Why don't you keep him while your mom and I talk?" When the girl had reluctantly gone to her room, Sarah gestured for Alexander to sit at the small dining table. "I know I'm behind on rent, Mr. Mitchell. I lost my job at the medical billing office when they downsized 3 months ago. I've been looking for work every day, but it's been difficult." 3 months is a significant delinquency. "Ms. Parker," Alexander said, reverting to his business tone. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been applying everywhere. I have an interview tomorrow at Boston General for an administrative position. If I get it, I could start catching up on payments within 2 weeks. And if you don't get it," Sarah's hands tightened on the table edge, "then we'll have to leave." "But you should know—" She paused, swallowing hard. "We've been homeless before, Mr. Mitchell. After Emma's father left, before we found this place. We lived in my car for 3 weeks in December. I promised her we would never go through that again." Alexander felt something shift inside him. The woman before him wasn't making excuses or begging. There was a quiet resilience in her eyes that spoke of someone who had fallen down repeatedly, but always found the strength to stand again. "Do you have family who could help?" he asked, surprised by his own question. This wasn't part of his usual eviction protocol. Sarah shook her head. "My parents passed away years ago. It's just Emma and me." From the other room came the sound of humming, a child's song about butterflies and sunshine. Alexander found himself thinking of James, of the way his son used to sing made-up songs while playing with his toys. "I should tell you that I have excellent references from my previous landlord," Sarah continued, "and from my former employer. I've never missed payments before this situation." Alexander stood abruptly. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too intimate. He needed air. "I'll need to review your case more thoroughly," he said stiffly. "In the meantime, I'll hold off on eviction proceedings for 2 weeks. Relief flooded Sarah's face. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, I promise—" "Don't make promises you might not be able to keep, Ms. Parker," he interrupted. 2 weeks. That's all I can offer." As he turned to leave, Emma peeked out from her bedroom doorway. "Are we staying, Mommy?" "For now, sweetheart," Sarah answered, the cautious hope in her voice making Alexander's chest tighten uncomfortably. At the door, he paused. "Good luck with your interview tomorrow, Ms. Parker." Outside in the cool evening air, Alexander stood motionless beside his waiting car. Thomas raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Inside his pocket, Alexander's fingers closed around a business card. After a moment's hesitation, he turned and went back into the building. He slipped the card under the door of apartment 2B. On the back, he had written, "Call if you need a reference for your interview, AM." In the car, Thomas asked, "Home now, sir?" Alexander nodded, staring out the window as Boston's streets slipped past. His mansion on Beacon Hill waited. 22 rooms filled with expensive furniture, rare art and absolute silence. No crayon drawings on the refrigerator. No teddy bears with missing eyes. No child offering her most precious possession to save her home. "Actually," he said suddenly, "stop at the market on Boylston first." Thomas's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. "The market, sir?" "Yes," Alexander replied, already composing a mental list. Groceries, basic necessities, things a small family might need while waiting for a job interview that might not come through. "I have an errand to run." The boardroom of Mitchell Enterprises fell silent as Alexander entered. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the long mahogany table, where 6 executive board members waited. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to thinly veiled impatience. At the far end sat Richard Harrington, the company's longest-serving executive, and Alexander's father's closest business partner. "You're late." "Alex," Richard remarked, checking his Rolex, "that's becoming a habit." Alexander took his seat at the head of the table. "I had a stop to make." He didn't elaborate, didn't mention that he'd personally delivered several bags of groceries to apartment 2B before coming to the office. The surprise and gratitude in Sarah Parker's eyes had followed him all morning. making it difficult to focus on quarterly reports and profit margins. "Well, now that you've joined us," Richard continued, "we can discuss the Bay Village properties. I've prepared eviction notices for the 7 tenants who are behind on payments. I need your signature to proceed." Alexander accepted the folder but didn't open it. "I visited one of those properties yesterday. The Winchester Street building." "Ah, yes. Apartment 2B, Richard nodded. "Sarah Parker. 3 months delinquent with no communication until recently. Classic case for immediate action. I've given her an extension." The words hung in the air like an unexpected thunderclap. Richard's eyes narrowed. "You what?" 2 weeks, Alexander clarified. "She has a job interview today." Richard exchanged glances with Victoria Adams, the chief financial officer. "Alex, we've discussed this. The Bay Village acquisition was your idea. Buy underperforming properties, renovate, raise rents, and sell at a premium. We have investors expecting a 15% return by next quarter." "And they'll get it," Alexander replied. 2 weeks won't change that." "It's not about 2 weeks. It's about precedent," Victoria interjected, her voice measured but firm. "If word gets out that you're personally intervening in eviction cases, then perhaps our tenants will see that we're not heartless automatons," Alexander cut in. The table fell silent again. Alexander rarely spoke so sharply in meetings, and never about tenant relations. For years, he had been the driving force behind the company's aggressive expansion, earning a reputation as the architect for his strategic vision and unsentimental business approach. Marcus Chen, the youngest board member, leaned forward. "Alexander, is everything all right? You seem different today." Before Alexander could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced down at the screen. "Unknown number, Mr. Mitchell, it's Sarah Parker. I got the job. They want me to start Monday. I can't thank you enough for the reference and the groceries. Emma wants to know if you like chocolate chip cookies. She wants to bake you some." A small smile touched Alexander's lips before he could suppress it. He tucked the phone away, aware of the curious stares around the table. "I'm fine," he said to Marcus. "Just reconsidering some of our approaches." Richard closed his portfolio with a snap. "Alex, let's speak privately after the meeting." The boardroom emptied 30 minutes later, leaving Alexander alone with Richard. The older man closed the door and turned to face him, concern evident in his weathered features. "What's going on, son?" "And don't tell me nothing. I've known you since you were in diapers." Alexander sighed. Richard had been a constant presence in his life, a mentor after his own father died, and a support system after the plane disaster. If anyone deserved honesty, it was him. "I met a little girl yesterday," Alexander said quietly. "She offered me her teddy bear, her most prized possession, to keep her mother from being evicted." Richard's expression softened slightly. "That's touching, Alex, but you can't make business decisions based on sentimental encounters. Can't I? Isn't that what my father would have done? Your father built this company by making tough decisions, not by getting personally involved with every hard luck case." Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city sprawled below. "Did you know that the Parker girl, Emma, she's the same age James would have been?" Richard's voice became gentler. "Alex, I understand the anniversary is coming up. It's natural to what? Feel something? Care about someone. When did that become a liability?" "It's not a liability to care," Richard said carefully, "but it is a liability to let emotion cloud your judgment. This company employs thousands of people who depend on you to make sound decisions." Alexander turned back to face his mentor. "And what if the soundest decision is to remember that our tenants are people, not just entries on a balance sheet?" Richard shook his head. "You're not thinking clearly. Take some time off. The Hamptons house is beautiful this time of year." "I don't need time off," Alexander replied firmly. "I need to remember why I'm doing any of this." After Richard left, Alexander remained in the boardroom, the folder of eviction notices untouched before him. He pulled out his phone and texted Sarah back. To Sarah Parker, "Congratulations on the job. Tell Emma I would love some cookies, but only if she saves one for herself." The response came almost immediately. "She says deal, but she needs to know if you prefer crunchy or chewy cookies." This is apparently very important information. Alexander found himself smiling again, a genuine smile that felt unfamiliar on his face. To Sarah Parker, "Definitely chewy. And thank you. That evening, instead of heading home to his empty mansion, Alexander found himself driving back to Winchester Street. He told himself it was to check on other units in the building, a perfectly reasonable thing for a property owner to do. But when he knocked on the door of 2B, he knew he was lying to himself. Emma opened the door, flour dusting her cheeks, and a bright smile lighting up her face. "Mr. Landlord Man, Mummy, he's here." Sarah appeared behind her daughter, looking both surprised and pleased. "Mr. Mitchell, we weren't expecting you." "Alexander, please," he said, feeling strangely awkward. "I was in the neighborhood." The small apartment smelled of vanilla and chocolate, and a plate of cookies cooled on the counter. Emma grabbed his hand with sticky fingers. "Come see. We made chewy ones just like you said." Alexander allowed himself to be pulled inside, feeling as though he was crossing more than just a physical threshold. Sarah watched him with curious eyes as her daughter chattered excitedly about the cookie-making process and her mom's new job. "I start Monday," Sarah confirmed. "It's inpatient admissions at Boston General. The salary is good and it comes with benefits." She hesitated. "I can pay half of the back rent with my first paycheck, and then—" Alexander raised a hand to stop her. "We can work out a payment plan." "That's not why I'm here." "Oh?" Sarah tilted her head, studying him. "I wanted to see how your interview went," he admitted. "And I suppose I wanted to see if the cookies lived up to their promised glory." Emma beamed and presented him with the biggest cookie on the plate. "This one's yours. I put extra chocolate chips in it." As Alexander accepted the cookie, his phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. He declined the call and took a bite of the cookie instead. "This is excellent," he told Emma, who practically bounced with pride. "Will you stay for dinner?" She asked hopefully. "We're having spaghetti because it's a celebration dinner for Mommy's new job." Sarah quickly intervened. "Emma, I'm sure Mr. Mitch. Alexander has other plans for dinner." He should say yes, he did have other plans. Important meetings, documents to review, calls to make. The sensible, normal response for someone in his position. Instead, he heard himself say, "Actually, I don't have any plans." "Hand spaghetti sounds perfect." The look of shock on Sarah's face slowly transformed into a warm smile. "Well then, I hope you don't mind if it's nothing fancy." "Nothing fancy sounds exactly right," Alexander replied, realizing how long it had been since he'd eaten a meal that wasn't prepared by a personal chef or served in a five-star restaurant. As he sat at their small table, listening to Emma describe her kindergarten adventures and watching Sarah move comfortably around the kitchen, Alexander felt something in his chest begin to thaw. The ever-present weight of his grief seemed, if not lighter, then at least balanced by something else, something he couldn't yet name but recognized as vital. His phone buzzed again. A text from Richard. "We need to discuss the Parker situation. Board members are concerned." Alexander turned his phone face down on the table and accepted a glass of water from Emma, who insisted on being his personal server for the evening. "Mr. Alexander," she said seriously as she climbed into her chair, "do you live in a castle? Mommy says you're very rich." "Emma!" Sarah exclaimed, mortified. Alexander laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even him. "Not a castle, just a very big, very empty house." "Is it empty because you're lonely?" Emma asked with a child's direct perception. The question landed like a physical blow. Alexander's smile faded, and for a moment the old grief threatened to overwhelm him. Sarah must have seen something in his expression, because she quickly changed the subject, asking about other properties in Boston. But as the evening progressed, Alexander found himself thinking about Emma's innocent question. The truth was simple. Yes, his house was empty because he was lonely, because Catherine and James were gone, because he had isolated himself in his work and his wealth, building walls that no one could penetrate. No one until a small girl with a teddy bear and her brave, determined mother. By the time dinner was over, Alexander knew his life had shifted irrevocably, though he couldn't yet see where this new path might lead. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of unexpected moments. Alexander found himself inventing reasons to visit the Winchester Street property, a loose railing that needed inspection, concerns about the heating system, a new security door that required his personal approval. Each visit inevitably led to apartment 2B, where Emma waited with artwork to show him or stories to tell. Sarah began her job at Boston General, working long but regular hours, that allowed her to pick Emma up from school most days. On the rare occasions when her shift ran late, Alexander surprised himself by offering to collect Emma from her after-school program. The first time he arrived, the program director gave him a suspicious look, until Emma launched herself at him with a delighted cry of, "Mr. Alexander," and proceeded to introduce him to everyone as "my mum's landlord," but also our friend who likes chewy cookies and doesn't live in a castle, even though he could. Today marked Sarah's second full paycheck, and Alexander had arranged to meet her to discuss the payment plan for her back rent. He sat in a cafe near the hospital, checking his watch and trying to ignore the persistent calls from Victoria Adams about the quarterly financials. "Sorry I'm late," Sarah said, sliding into the seat across from him. She looked different in her hospital ID badge and neat blue blouse, more confident, though still carrying the quiet dignity that had first struck him. "Emergency admission right at the end of my shift." "No problem," Alexander replied, pushing a coffee toward her. "I ordered for you." "Emma mentioned you like vanilla lattes." Sarah smiled, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Emma seems to tell you a lot these days. She's a remarkable child. She talks about you constantly, you know. Alexander this, Alexander that. I think you've replaced her preschool teacher as her favorite adult." An unexpected warmth spread through Alexander's chest at the thought. "I'm honored. She's special." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "You're good with her." "Do you have children?" The question was innocent, but it hit like a physical blow. Alexander's hand tightened on his own cup, and he saw concern flash across Sarah's face as she recognized her misstep. "I had a son," he said quietly. "James, he would have been about Emma's age now." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "I'm so sorry, Alexander. I didn't know." "It's been 3 years," he cleared his throat. "My wife, Catherine, was with him. Their plane. There was an accident over the Atlantic." Sarah reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The simple human contact, something he'd avoided for so long, sent an electric current through him. "Emma lost her teddy bear the day we met," he continued, not sure why he was telling her this. "She offered it to me to save your home. It reminded me of James. He had a stuffed dinosaur he never went anywhere without." Sarah's eyes glistened. "Children have a way of seeing through all our defenses, don't they?" Alexander nodded, then straightened, pulling his professional mask back into place. "About your payment plan, I have a proposal," Sarah interrupted, her expression serious. "I know I owe 3 months' rent, which comes to $4,200. I can pay $800 now and then add $400 to my monthly rent until I'm caught up." Alexander considered her offer. It was reasonable, even generous given her salary, but something else had been weighing on his mind. "Actually, I have a different proposition." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Mitchell Enterprises needs an administrative coordinator for our tenant relations department. The position oversees community outreach, handles tenant communications, and helps develop programs to improve our properties." He slid a folder across the table. "The salary is nearly double what you're making at the hospital, with better benefits and flexible hours that would allow you to be home when Emma finishes school." Sarah stared at the folder without opening it. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity. You're organized, personable, and you understand the tenant perspective firsthand." Alexander leaned forward. "This isn't charity, Sarah. We need someone like you." "Someone like me," she repeated slowly. "Or specifically me." "Both," Alexander admitted. "I've watched you rebuild your life these past weeks with remarkable resilience. Our company could use that kind of strength." Sarah finally opened the folder, her eyes widening as she scanned the job description and compensation package. "This is generous." "It's market rate for the position," Alexander replied, though they both knew it was more than that. "You'd report directly to me, at least initially." A small smile played at the corners of Sarah's mouth. "And what would your board think about that? The tenant who was nearly evicted suddenly working alongside the CEO?" Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "The board doesn't make hiring decisions for my executive team. I'm not qualified for an executive position." "You're more qualified than you think." He tapped the folder. "Read through it. Think about it. The offer stands regardless of what you decide about the payment plan." Sarah closed the folder and met his gaze. "Why are you doing this, Alexander?" It was the question he'd been asking himself for 2 weeks, the question Richard had demanded an answer to, the question that had kept him awake at night. Why was he, Alexander Mitchell, Boston's most ruthless real estate developer, personally invested in the welfare of a single mother and her daughter? "Because I've spent 3 years building an empire that means nothing," he said finally, the truth surprising even him. "Because Emma offered me her teddy bear and reminded me that there are things more valuable than quarterly returns. Because you make me remember who I was before I lost everything that mattered." The raw honesty hung between them, too intimate for the bustling cafe around them. Sarah's eyes never left his face, searching for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or hidden motives. "I need to think about it," she said at last. "The job, I mean." "Of course." Alexander nodded, already regretting his emotional disclosure. "Take all the time you need." Sarah gathered her purse and the folder, then hesitated. "Emma's school is having a family picnic this Saturday at the Commons. She asked if you would come." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "You don't have to, of course. She just thought—" "I'd love to," Alexander interrupted, surprised by his own eagerness. Sarah's smile lit up her face. "Great. We'll meet you by the duck pond at noon." As she walked away, Alexander's phone buzzed with another call from Victoria. This time he answered. "Alexander, the board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," Victoria said without preamble. "Richard is making a motion to review your leadership position in light of recent decisions." Alexander's jaw tightened. "What decisions would those be?" "The Parker situation, for one. You've been photographed picking up her child from school, Alexander. The Daily Finance ran a piece this morning questioning your judgment." He hadn't seen the article, had deliberately avoided reading any press about himself since Catherine and James disappeared. "There's more," Victoria continued, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Richard has been meeting with major shareholders, suggesting that your grief has compromised your business acumen. He's proposing a temporary leadership transition while you take an extended leave of absence." Alexander's hand clenched around his phone. "He's trying to force me out." "Not permanently," Victoria cautioned. "He's positioning it as a wellness sabbatical. But yes, essentially, he's making a play for control." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Alexander said, already signaling for the check. "Call Marcus and Jennifer. I want to know where they stand before tomorrow." As his car navigated through Boston's afternoon traffic, Alexander stared out at the city that had been his family's domain for generations. The Mitchell name adorned buildings, parks, and hospital wings. His father had built an empire, and Alexander had expanded it, often at the cost of families like Sarah's, people who became numbers on spreadsheets, obstacles to be removed for progress and profit. When had he become this person? When had the compassionate young man who once volunteered at homeless shelters been replaced by the architect, feared and respected, but never loved? He knew the answer. It happened the day he stood on a windswept tarmac, watching as officials explained why the search for the private plane had been called off, why there was no hope of finding survivors. That day Alexander Mitchell had locked away his heart and thrown away the key, until a small hand had offered him a one-eyed teddy bear. At the office, Victoria waited with Marcus Chen. Jennifer Lawson, the head of legal, joined them via video conference. All three wore expressions of concern. "The situation is delicate," Jennifer began. "Richard has significant shareholder support, particularly from your father's old guard. They're concerned about the Parker hire." "She hasn't accepted the position yet," Alexander countered. "But you made the offer," Marcus pointed out, after nearly getting photographed having dinner at her apartment. "The optics aren't good, Alexander." "The optics," Alexander repeated, a bitter taste in his mouth. 3 years ago, when I wanted to pull out of the riverfront development because it would displace 100 families, you all talked about optics then, too. About how the Mitchell name needed to be associated with progress, not sentimentality." Victoria sighed. "And you were right to push forward. The riverfront properties increased our portfolio value by 20%. "At what cost?" Alexander asked quietly. The three executives exchanged glances. "Tomorrow's meeting will be challenging," Jennifer said. "Richard has prepared a dossier suggesting you're exhibiting signs of emotional instability. The Parker situation is his primary evidence." Alexander stood, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the city. I want each of you to think about something tonight. Think about what kind of company Mitchell Enterprises should be. Not just profitable, but responsible, humane. Alexander, Victoria began cautiously, you know we all respect your vision, but nothing, he interrupted. My father built this company with certain principles. Somewhere along the way, somewhere along my way, we lost sight of those principles. I'm not having an emotional breakdown. I'm having a moral awakening. Marcus looked troubled. What exactly are you planning, Alexander? Alexander turned back to face his team, a new resolve hardening within him. I'm planning to remind everyone, including myself, what the Mitchell name is supposed to stand for. And I'm starting with Sarah Parker. The boardroom buzzed with tension as Alexander took his seat. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air, illuminating the faces of 12 board members arranged around the mahogany table. Richard Harrington sat at the opposite end, a thick folder positioned precisely in front of him. His expression was one of regretful determination, the face of a man convinced he was doing something painful but necessary. Let's begin, Richard said, tapping his gavel lightly. This emergency session has been called to address concerns regarding recent management decisions and their potential impact on shareholder value. Alexander leaned back in his chair, outwardly relaxed, despite the storm gathering around him. Victoria sat to his right, her posture rigid. Marcus had taken a seat halfway down the table, his loyalty still undetermined. Before we start, Alexander interrupted, his voice calm, I'd like to distribute some materials. He nodded to his assistant, who began placing folders before each board member. Inside, you'll find my proposal for a new Mitchell Enterprises community initiative. I was planning to present this next month, but given today's agenda, it seems relevant now. Richard frowned. Alex, we have a specific matter to discuss. Yes, my supposed emotional instability and its impact on company operations, Alexander said evenly. I believe my proposal addresses those concerns directly. The board members exchanged glances, some curious, others wary. They opened the folders to find a detailed business plan titled Mitchell Foundation for Housing Security. The foundation would operate as a separate non-profit entity, Alexander explained, standing to address the room. It would allocate 5% of our annual profits to programs supporting affordable housing, tenant assistance during hardship, and community development in our properties. Victoria's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He hadn't shared these details with her. 5%? Richard repeated incredulously. That would reduce shareholder dividends by nearly $20 million annually. Initially, yes, Alexander acknowledged, but the foundation would enhance our corporate image, leading to increased property values in adjacent developments, tax benefits, and improved tenant retention. The financial projections on page 12 demonstrate a net positive impact within 3 years. Board members flipped to the indicated page, murmurs rippling around the table as they reviewed the numbers. Alexander had spent all night preparing the proposal, working with the financial team to ensure the projections were conservative and defensible. This is unexpected, Jennifer Lawson said, studying the document carefully, but not unsound from a business perspective. Richard's face had darkened. This feels rushed and emotional, exactly the kind of decision-making that prompted this meeting. Alex, you've been behaving erratically since meeting the Parker woman and her child. Erratically? Alexander raised an eyebrow. By showing compassion to a tenant, by remembering that our business affects real people's lives, by personally intervening in eviction proceedings, by offering a high-level position to an unqualified tenant, by allowing your personal feelings to override business protocols, Richard countered, opening his own folder. We have documented evidence of your increasing emotional instability. Stability isn't the absence of emotion, Richard, Alexander cut in, his voice sharpening. It's the wisdom to know when emotion should inform our decisions. Marcus cleared his throat. I've reviewed Alexander's foundation proposal, and while ambitious, it's strategically sound. Many of our competitors have similar programs that have enhanced their market position. Richard's jaw tightened visibly. This isn't about the foundation. It's about Alexander's judgment being compromised by his personal attachment to the Parker family. Then let's address that directly, Alexander said, turning to face the entire board. Yes, I've become personally acquainted with Sarah Parker and her daughter. Yes, that connection has made me reconsider some of our company's practices. But that reconsideration isn't clouding my judgment, it's clarifying it. He tapped the proposal before them. Everything in this document aligns with the values upon which my father built this company. Somewhere along the way, particularly after I lost my family, we strayed from those values in pursuit of profit above all else. I'm simply suggesting we find a balance. Richard stood, his patience visibly fraying. This is exactly the emotional rhetoric I was concerned about. Alex, no one questions that you've suffered a tremendous loss. We're merely suggesting you take time to properly process that grief, instead of channeling it into impulsive business decisions. And who would lead the company during this sabbatical? Alexander asked quietly. You, Richard. A tense silence fell over the room. The power play was now nakedly apparent to everyone present. As COO, I would temporarily assume leadership responsibilities. Yes, Richard acknowledged without shame. For the good of the company, Alexander smiled thinly. The company my family built. The company that bears my name. A name you seem increasingly willing to tarnish, Richard shot back. The Daily Finance article questions whether your judgment has been compromised by an inappropriate relationship with a tenant. The shareholders deserve better. Alexander's expression hardened. Choose your next words very carefully, Richard. My personal life is not up for discussion in this room. Jennifer Lawson intervened, her legal mind seeking compromise. Perhaps we should table the leadership transition discussion and focus on the foundation proposal. It has merit worth exploring. As does the question of Ms. Parker's employment offer, Victoria added unexpectedly. Having reviewed her qualifications more thoroughly, I believe she could bring valuable perspective to our tenant relations department. Richard looked betrayed. Victoria, you can't seriously— I'm evaluating the business case, Richard, she replied crisply. Diverse viewpoints improve decision-making. Ms. Parker's first-hand experience as a tenant would be an asset to that department. The board meeting continued for another hour. The proposed sabbatical eventually tabled for further discussion, while the foundation concept received provisional approval for development. As members filed out, Richard lingered, waiting until he and Alexander were alone. This isn't over, Alex, he said quietly. You're not thinking clearly. Actually, Richard, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Alexander gathered his materials unhurriedly. My father would have approved of the foundation. He understood that business success and social responsibility could coexist. Richard's expression softened slightly. Your father was a pragmatist, Alex. He knew when to be compassionate and when to be decisive. Since losing Catherine and James, you've struggled with that balance. The mention of his family sent a familiar pain through Alexander's chest, but he maintained his composure. I appreciate your concern for my well-being, Richard, truly. But I don't need a sabbatical. I need to remember why all of this matters, and the Parker woman reminds you. Richard's tone held an edge of disbelief. Or is it the child? Alexander met his gaze directly. Both of them remind me that behind every lease agreement is a family trying to build a life. Is that really so radical a notion for a housing company to consider? Richard shook his head. There's something you're not saying. This feels personal in a way that goes beyond corporate philosophy. Perhaps it is, Alexander conceded, but that doesn't make it wrong. He left Richard standing in the boardroom, troubled thoughts evident in the older man's furrowed brow. Outside, Boston's autumn sun was setting, casting long shadows across the financial district. Alexander's driver waited by the car, but instead of getting in, Alexander waved him off. I'll walk for a bit, Thomas. Go home to your family. The crisp evening air cleared his mind as he walked without destination, eventually finding himself at the public garden where children played among the season's last flowers. Saturday's picnic with Sarah and Emma would be here. The thought brought an unexpected smile to his face. His phone rang, Sarah's number. He answered immediately. I've been thinking about your job offer, she said without preamble. I have questions. I have answers, he replied, finding a bench overlooking the duck pond. Ask away. Is this position real or did you create it for me? Alexander appreciated her directness. The position is real, though I'll admit the timing of the opening is convenient. We've needed someone in this role for months. And the salary, is it actually commensurate with the responsibilities? Market rate for the qualifications and duties, he confirmed. You'd earn every penny, Sarah. This isn't charity. There was a pause, the sound of her considering his words. The Daily Finance ran an article about you today.
It
mentioned me and Emma. Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. I'm sorry about that. I've arranged for additional security at your building and Emma's school. That's not why I'm calling, Sarah said quickly. I wanted you to know that I'm not bothered by what they wrote, but I am concerned about how it might affect you and your company. The simple consideration, in her voice, her worry for him despite her own precarious situation, touched Alexander deeply. My company will be fine, he assured her. Today's board meeting ended better than expected. I'm glad, her voice softened. Emma's been making decorations for the picnic all evening. She's very excited you're coming. Alexander watched as a young father helped his son throw breadcrumbs to the ducks, the child's delighted laughter carrying across the pond. I'm looking forward to it. And Sarah, about the job, take your time deciding. The offer doesn't expire. Actually, that's why I called, she replied, a smile evident in her voice. I'd like to accept the position, if it's still available. Something warm unfurled in Alexander's chest. It is. We can discuss details on Saturday. After they hung up, Alexander remained on the bench, watching families enjoy the last light of day. For 3 years, he had avoided places like this, parks, playgrounds, anywhere children's laughter might trigger memories of James. Now he found himself seeking them out, the pain of remembering gradually yielding to something else, not healing exactly, but a kind of peaceful coexistence with his grief. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard. We need to discuss next steps. The board may have postponed the sabbatical vote, but shareholders are still concerned. Breakfast tomorrow? Alexander typed a brief reply. Something's come up. Monday. The something was nothing more than his desire to spend Saturday at a school picnic with a 5-year-old girl and her mother, but it felt more important than any shareholder meeting. As the last families departed and twilight settled over the garden, Alexander realized he was smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. His phone buzzed again. A text from Sarah with a photo attached, Emma sleeping. Her teddy bear clutched in one arm and a homemade card that read, "For Mr. Alexander," in crooked letters propped beside her. Sarah's message read, "She insisted on finishing this before bed. See you Saturday." Alexander saved the photo, then stood to hail a cab. Instead of directing the driver to his Beacon Hill mansion, he gave the address of his company's downtown development office. "Little late for work, isn't it?" the cabbie commented. "Not work," Alexander replied. "Planning." At the office, he spent hours refining the foundation proposal, expanding its scope and clarifying its mission. When he finally glanced at his watch, it was nearly midnight. He should go home, get some rest before tomorrow's picnic. Instead, he opened his computer and began composing an email to the company's legal team. Subject: Mitchell Foundation for Housing Security. Immediate action required. Begin drafting incorporation documents and funding structure. Priority status. I want this operational within 30 days. As he pressed send, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Not the cold determination that had driven his business expansion, but something warmer and more meaningful. The foundation would be his legacy, not just to honor Catherine and James, but to build something worthy of Emma's innocent faith in him. Something that might make a difference to families like hers. Something worth building an empire for. Saturday dawned clear and unseasonably warm for October in Boston. Alexander arrived at the public garden 15 minutes early, carrying a small gift bag and feeling strangely nervous. He had faced hostile takeovers and negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. Yet the prospect of a school picnic with Sarah and Emma had him checking his watch every 30 seconds. Families dotted the grassy areas around the duck pond, spreading blankets and unpacking picnic baskets. Children chased each other, while parents chatted in small clusters. Alexander felt conspicuously out of place in his casual clothes, designer jeans and a simple button-down that had required 3 wardrobe changes before he decided they looked normal enough. Alexander. Emma's voice carried across the garden, and he turned to see her running toward him, blonde curls bouncing, with Sarah following at a more measured pace. Emma launched herself at him with complete trust, and he caught her automatically, her small arms wrapping around his neck in a fierce hug. "You came. I told Mommy you wouldn't forget, and you didn't." "I wouldn't miss it," Alexander replied, setting her down carefully. He looked up to find Sarah watching them, an unreadable expression in her eyes. "Good morning," he said, suddenly feeling awkward. Sarah smiled. "Good morning. I hope you like peanut butter and jelly." Emma insisted on making the sandwiches herself. "Crusts cut off?" he asked seriously. Emma nodded emphatically. "The crusts are yucky. I made you 2 sandwiches because Mummy says you're a grown-up, and grown-ups eat more." "That's very thoughtful," Alexander said, matching her solemn tone. "I brought something too." He offered her the small gift bag. Emma's eyes widened with delight as she reached inside and pulled out a small plush duck. "It's like the ones in the pond," she exclaimed, hugging it to her chest. "I thought it could keep Teddy company," Alexander explained, glancing at Sarah to gauge her reaction to the gift. She gave a small nod of approval. They found a spot beneath a maple tree, its leaves a brilliant explosion of red and orange. As Sarah spread out a checkered blanket, Alexander noticed other parents watching them curiously. He recognized the mixture of recognition and speculation in their expressions, the same looks he received in boardrooms and at charity events. The Daily Finance article had evidently made the rounds. "My teacher is coming to meet you," Emma informed him as she arranged her duck next to Teddy. "I told her you're my mummy's special friend who owns our house but doesn't make us pay all the money at once." Sarah choked slightly on her water. "Emma's, remember what we discussed about private conversations?" Emma nodded seriously. "Some things are just for family ears." "That's right," Sarah said, throwing Alexander an apologetic glance. "Sorry about that. She's been telling everyone about you." "I don't mind," Alexander replied honestly, surprising himself with the realization that he truly didn't care what others thought. "Though I should clarify that I don't own your house specifically. The company owns the building. But you own the company," Emma pointed out with impeccable 5-year-old logic. "So you own our house." Before Alexander could respond, a woman in her 50s approached their blanket, her kind face creased with a warm smile. "Emma Parker, I was wondering where you'd gotten to. Aren't you going to introduce me to your guests?" Emma jumped up. "Ms. Wilson, this is my mom and this is Mr. Alexander. He's the one I told you about who's going to give my mom a job at his castle." Ms. Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Castle?" "Office building," Sarah clarified, extending her hand. "Sarah Parker. It's nice to meet you. Emma talks about you constantly." "Likewise," Ms. Wilson replied, her gaze shifting to Alexander with undisguised curiosity. "And you must be the mysterious Mr. Alexander I've heard so much about. Emma's drawings lately have featured a very tall man with a briefcase." Alexander stood to shake her hand. "Alexander Mitchell. I'm Emma's friend." The word felt simultaneously insufficient and entirely accurate. Recognition flickered in the teacher's eyes. "Mitchell Enterprises. I should have made the connection. Emma mentioned you were in real estate." The conversation might have grown awkward, but Emma tugged at Ms. Wilson's hand. "Did you bring the bubbles? You promised bubbles for good listeners. And you've been an excellent listener," Ms. Wilson assured her, producing a small bottle from her pocket. "Why don't you show your mom and Mr. Mitchell the bubble trick we learned in class?" As Emma happily occupied herself with the bubbles a short distance away, Ms. Wilson's expression became more serious. "Mr. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind my directness, but Emma has been through some difficult transitions. She's a remarkably resilient child, but she forms attachments quickly and deeply." The gentle warning was clear. Alexander nodded, appreciating her concern. "I understand. I have no intention of disappointing her." "Good," Ms. Wilson said simply. "She's special, that one." "Yes, she is," Alexander agreed, watching as Emma attempted to catch bubbles on her fingertip, her face a portrait of concentration. Ms. Wilson excused herself to greet other families, and Sarah moved closer to Alexander. "She's protective of her students, especially Emma." "With good reason," Alexander replied. "Emma mentioned transitions." "Her father?" Sarah's expression clouded slightly. "Jason left when Emma was 2. He wasn't prepared for fatherhood, I suppose. We haven't heard from him in over 3 years." Alexander felt a surge of anger toward this unknown man, who could walk away from such an extraordinary child. "His loss," he said quietly. Yes, Sarah agreed, watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and sadness. Though sometimes I worry about what that loss means for Emma. Before Alexander could respond, Emma came running back, breathless with excitement. Mommy, the duck boat is here. Can we go, please, please? Please? The famous Boston Duck Tours boat had indeed arrived at the edge of the pond, offering short rides to the picnic attendees. Sarah hesitated. Honey, I'm not sure. I'd be happy to take her if that's all right with you, Alexander offered. You could have a break. The flash of gratitude in Sarah's eyes was answer enough. That would be wonderful, actually. These school events can be a bit overwhelming. As Alexander and Emma made their way toward the duck boat, he felt a small hand slip into his with complete trust. The simple gesture affected him more deeply than he could have anticipated. Will the boat really go in the water? Emma asked, skipping beside him. It will, Alexander confirmed. It's specially designed to drive on land and float on water. Like magic? Like engineering, he corrected with a smile. But yes, a bit like magic, too. They joined the short queue, Emma chattering excitedly about ducks, boats, and a bewildering array of seemingly unconnected topics. Alexander found himself fully engaged, answering her questions and asking his own, marveling at the intricate workings of her young mind. From across the garden, he could see Sarah watching them, a soft smile playing at her lips. When she caught his eye, she gave a small wave that he returned, feeling oddly like a teenager, acknowledging his prom date across a crowded gymnasium. The duck boat ride lasted only 15 minutes, but Emma's delight made it seem magical. She squealed with joy when the vehicle splashed into the pond, gripping Alexander's hand tightly and pressing against his side. Without thinking, he put his arm around her small shoulders, steadying her as she leaned over to look at the water. Mr. Alexander, she said suddenly, her expression serious despite her excitement, are you going to marry my mommy? The question caught him completely off guard. What makes you ask that, Emma? She shrugged as if the answer were obvious. Because you look at her like Prince Eric looks at Ariel, and because you make her smile even when she's tired, and because I think you need us and we need you. The simple, profound observation left Alexander speechless. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. Your mommy and I are just getting to know each other, he said finally, choosing his words carefully. But I care about both of you very much. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer. Good, because I already told Teddy you might be my new dad someday. Alexander's heart constricted painfully. He thought of James, of the life that had been stolen from them all. But here was this extraordinary child offering him a place in her heart, a chance at something he'd believed forever lost. When they returned to the blanket, Sarah had unpacked their picnic lunch. How was the ride? She asked, noting Emma's flushed, happy face. It was awesome, Emma declared, launching into a detailed description of every moment while Alexander settled beside Sarah. Thank you for taking her, Sarah said quietly. She'll remember this day forever. So will I, Alexander replied honestly. They ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, crusts removed, apple slices and cookies that Emma had decorated herself with colorful icing. Alexander couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so good, perhaps because it had been prepared with love rather than culinary precision. As the afternoon progressed, Alexander found himself drawn into the school community almost against his will. Emma insisted on introducing him to her friends, proudly announcing that he owned all the buildings in Boston, a considerable exaggeration, and could do magic with money, an interesting interpretation of his financial acumen. Sarah was pulled into a conversation with other mothers, occasionally glancing over at him with a mixture of amusement and apology as Emma continued her enthusiastic introductions. Alexander surprised himself by not minding at all. There was something refreshingly honest about the children's curiosity compared to the veiled inquiries of Boston's social elite. The afternoon was winding down when Alexander noticed a photographer discreetly taking pictures from behind a nearby tree. His security training kicked in immediately, and he subtly positioned himself between the camera and Emma. Sarah, he said quietly when she returned to their blanket, don't look now, but there's a photographer at 3 o'clock, probably from one of the tabloids. Sarah tensed. Should we leave? Alexander hesitated. Emma was happily playing a game with her classmates, completely unaware of the intrusion. "Let me handle it," he said, standing casually and making his way toward the photographer. The man lowered his camera as Alexander approached, recognition and wariness crossing his face. "Mitchell Enterprises has an excellent legal team," Alexander said conversationally, but with steel beneath his words. "They're particularly aggressive when it comes to the privacy of minors. I suggest you delete those photos and find a different story to pursue." The photographer hesitated, clearly weighing his options. "The public has an interest." "The public has no legitimate interest in a 5-year-old child," Alexander interrupted, his voice hardening. "Delete the photos, now." Something in his expression must have conveyed the seriousness of the threat, because the photographer reluctantly opened his camera's display and began deleting images. "You know this won't stop the speculation," he said. "Mitchell's mysterious new family. It's a headline that sells." "Speculate about me all you want," Alexander replied, "but leave the child out of it." As he walked back to the blanket, Alexander realized with a start that he hadn't denied the family characterization. More surprisingly, he didn't want to deny it. The afternoon spent with Sarah and Emma had felt more like family than anything he'd experienced in 3 years. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked as he rejoined them. Alexander nodded, helping her pack up their picnic supplies as Emma said goodbye to her friends. "Just a misunderstanding." "Mr. Alexander?" Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Can we get ice cream before we go home? There's a truck over there, and Mommy said I could ask you." He looked at Sarah, who shrugged with a smile. "She's very persistent." "A valuable quality," Alexander replied, taking Emma's hand. "Ice cream it is." As they walked toward the ice cream truck, Emma between them holding both their hands and occasionally demanding to be swung into the air, Alexander caught their reflection in a shop window. They looked like any other family enjoying a Saturday in the park. A mother, a father, a child. The image sent an ache of longing through him so powerful it nearly took his breath away. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Sarah asked as Emma ran ahead to study the ice cream options. Alexander hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was thinking how much I've missed this. Family, connection, purpose beyond the next acquisition or development." Sarah's expression softened. "For what it's worth, you're very good at it. Being part of a family, I mean. Even after only a few weeks, some things you don't forget," she said quietly. "Like riding a bicycle." Their eyes met, and Alexander felt a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name, gratitude perhaps or hope. Before he could respond, Emma bounded back to them, announcing that she wanted a rainbow popsicle with all the colors. Later, as they walked Sarah and Emma back to their apartment, Alexander found himself wishing the day wouldn't end. Emma, sticky with ice cream and tired from playing, asked to be carried. Without hesitation, Alexander lifted her onto his shoulders, her small hands resting securely in his. "I had a really good day," she said sleepily. "The best day ever." "Me too," Alexander replied, meaning it more than she could know. At their apartment door, Emma insisted on a hug before going inside. She wrapped her arms around Alexander's neck, whispering in his ear, "Teddy says thank you for the duck. He was lonely before." The simple statement hit Alexander with unexpected force. "Tell Teddy he's very welcome," he managed to say past the lump in his throat. After Emma went inside to wash up, Sarah lingered in the doorway. "Thank you for today, for everything, really." "You don't have to thank me," Alexander said. "Being with you both. It's been the brightest part of my life in a very long time." Sarah studied his face, then made a decision. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek, a gentle touch that seemed to ignite every nerve ending in his body. "Good night, Alexander." As the door closed behind her, Alexander stood motionless in the hallway, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been. Something was happening to him, something both terrifying and exhilarating. He was falling, not just for Sarah, but for the possibility of a family he'd thought forever beyond his reach. He was still standing there when his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Richard Harrington's name flashed on the screen. Alexander hesitated, then declined the call. Whatever crisis Richard perceived at Mitchell Enterprises, it could wait until Monday. Tonight, Alexander wanted to hold on to the feeling of Emma's small hand in his, the warmth of Sarah's kiss on his cheek, and the fleeting image of the family they might become. Monday morning arrived with the crisp promise of a new beginning. Sarah stood in the marble lobby of Mitchell Enterprises, Her reflection multiplied in the polished surfaces around her. She wore her most professional outfit, a navy blazer over a simple blouse and matching skirt, but still felt conspicuously out of place among the sleek executives gliding through security turnstiles with practiced ease. Ms. Parker? A young woman with a tablet approached, her smile professionally warm. I'm Megan, Mr. Mitchell's executive assistant. He asked me to escort you upstairs. Sarah followed her to a private elevator that whispered open at the touch of Megan's security badge. Everyone's very excited about the new tenant relations department, Megan offered as they ascended. It's been a topic of discussion since Mr. Mitchell announced it last week. I'm sure it has, Sarah replied, wondering exactly what kind of discussion she had inspired among the corporate ranks. The whispers and curious glances from employees in the lobby hadn't escaped her notice. The elevator opened directly into a reception area on the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. Alexander stood waiting, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. Sarah, he greeted her, extending his hand formally, a gesture clearly for the benefit of watching staff. Welcome to Mitchell Enterprises. Thank you for the opportunity, she replied, matching his professional tone while accepting his handshake. His fingers lingered against hers a moment longer than necessary, the brief contact sending an undeniable current between them. I thought we'd start with a tour, Alexander suggested, then introduce you to your team. My team, Sarah echoed, surprise evident in her voice. I have a team already? A hint of a smile played at the corners of Alexander's mouth. The tenant relations department consists of 5 staff members, transferred from various departments, all with relevant experience. They're eager to meet their new director. Director. The title sent a flutter of both excitement and anxiety through Sarah's stomach. 2 weeks ago, she had been unemployed and facing eviction. Now she was being escorted through the headquarters of Boston's largest real estate development company as a department director. Alexander guided her through the executive floor, introducing her to key personnel with a clear message in his voice and posture. Sarah Parker belongs here. She is one of us now. The subtle reinforcement wasn't lost on either Sarah or the curious executives who greeted her with varying degrees of warmth and speculation. They paused at a glass-walled conference room where Richard Harrington was leading a meeting. The older executive glanced up, his conversation faltering momentarily as he registered Sarah's presence at Alexander's side. His expression remained neutral, but Sarah felt the weight of his assessment and his disapproval across the distance. Richard is my COO, Alexander explained quietly as they continued walking. He's been with the company since my father's time. He doesn't approve of me, Sarah observed. Alexander's mouth tightened slightly. Richard doesn't approve of change in general. He'll come around. The tour concluded at a newly renovated section of the executive floor. A frosted glass door bore the inscription, Tenant Relations and Community Outreach in elegant lettering. Inside, a spacious office suite housed several workstations surrounding a central meeting area. 5 people rose as they entered, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and professional attentiveness. Team, this is Sarah Parker, your new director, Alexander announced. Sarah, meet your department. Maya Rodriguez, Community Liaison. Danielle Chen, Tenant Advocacy. Brianna Washington, Housing Assistance Coordinator. Tyler Evans, Financial Counseling. And Layla Nasser, Administrative Support. Sarah shook hands with each of them, noting the diverse backgrounds represented in the carefully assembled team. Alexander had clearly put thought into building a department that could address the complex needs of their tenant community. I've asked each of them to prepare briefings on their areas of expertise, Alexander continued. They'll help you understand our current programs and where we have opportunities to expand. After introducing her to the team and showing her to a corner office with views of the harbor, larger than her entire apartment, Alexander excused himself for a meeting. Megan will check in with you after lunch to see if you need anything. My calendar is full today, but perhaps we could discuss your first impressions over dinner. The professional veneer slipped just slightly, enough for Sarah to glimpse the man who had carried Emma on his shoulders and eaten peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off. I'd like that, she replied softly. Left alone with her new team, Sarah took a deep breath and channeled the confidence that had sustained her through far more challenging circumstances. Let's start with what you all do, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts on what we could be doing better. I have some ideas, but I want to understand the current landscape first. By lunchtime, Sarah's head was swimming with information about tenant assistance programs, community initiatives, and corporate philanthropy. Maya had shown her the preliminary materials for the Mitchell Foundation that Alexander was developing, an ambitious project that would fundamentally reshape the company's relationship with its communities. It's revolutionary for a development company of this size, Maya explained, her enthusiasm evident. Most corporations handle philanthropy as a side project or PR exercise. Mr. Mitchell is integrating it into the core business model. Sarah studied the foundation proposal, recognizing the depth of commitment it represented. This wasn't a superficial gesture or corporate maneuvering. It was a genuine attempt to create meaningful change. She felt a swell of pride, knowing her and Emma's small story had somehow catalyzed this larger vision. Around 1 o'clock, a knock at her office door interrupted her review of the materials. She expected to see Megan, but instead found Richard Harrington standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Miss Parker," he said, his voice neutral but cold, "I hope you're finding everything satisfactory." Sarah straightened in her chair, instinctively on guard. "Very much so, Mr. Harrington. Everyone has been extremely helpful." Richard stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "Good. I wanted to welcome you personally to Mitchell Enterprises." The words were correct, but the tone conveyed something entirely different. Sarah waited, sensing there was more to this visit than a simple welcome. "Alexander has great faith in your abilities," Richard continued, studying her with calculating eyes. "Despite your unconventional qualifications for an executive position." "I may not have traditional corporate experience," Sarah acknowledged calmly, "but I bring a perspective this department needs, first-hand understanding of tenant concerns and challenges." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed. And I'm sure your perspective has been very enlightening for Alexander. He's been quite transformed since meeting you and your daughter." The implied accusation hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her cheeks warm with indignation, but kept her voice level. "Mr. Mitchell is implementing changes that will benefit both the company and its tenants. That seems like sound business to me." "Ms. Parker," Richard said, dropping all pretense of pleasantries, "I've known Alexander since he was a child. I was there when he lost Catherine and James. I watched him rebuild himself through sheer force of will. Whatever you think you're doing, whatever you think you're creating with him, you need to understand what you're involving yourself in." Sarah's hands curled into fists beneath her desk. "I'm not doing anything, Mr. Harrington, except accepting a job for which I'm qualified and grateful. My relationship with Alexander, Mr. Mitchell, is not your concern." "It becomes my concern when it affects this company," Richard countered. "Alexander is vulnerable right now, though he wouldn't admit it. The foundation proposal, this department, your position here. These are all manifestations of his grief finding a new outlet." The cruel assessment struck Sarah like a physical blow. "You think I'm taking advantage of his grief? I think you're a convenient vessel for his emotional recovery," Richard said bluntly. "A ready-made family to replace the one he lost. The question is whether you're willing to be that for him, knowing it's not really you he's seeing when he looks at you and your daughter." Before Sarah could respond, the door opened and Alexander entered, stopping short at the tableau before him. Richard standing imposingly over Sarah's desk, her face flushed with anger and hurt. "Richard," Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet, "what's going on here?" "Just welcoming our newest executive," Richard replied smoothly, turning toward the door. "We were having a fascinating discussion about qualifications and motivations." Alexander's jaw tightened visibly. "My office now." As Richard departed, Alexander moved to Sarah's side. "What did he say to you?" Sarah shook her head, unwilling to repeat the cruel insinuations. "It's nothing I can't handle." "Sarah," Alexander insisted gently, "please tell me." "He thinks I'm using you," she said finally, meeting his gaze directly. "Or rather, that you're using me and Emma as replacements for your family." The words hurt to say aloud, giving voice to fears she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. Alexander's expression darkened with anger, then softened as he looked at her. "That's not what's happening here. You know that, right?" "Do I?" Sarah asked quietly. "Alexander, everything has happened so quickly. This job, our friendship. Emma is already so attached to you. Maybe Richard has a point about the timing." "The timing is irrelevant, Alexander," interrupted, taking her hand. "Yes, meeting you and Emma has changed me. Yes, it's made me confront grief I've been avoiding for years. But you're not replacements for anyone. You're Sarah and Emma Parker, and you've become important to me because of who you are, not who you remind me of." The sincerity in his voice was impossible to doubt. Sarah squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the connection. "I believe you, but this situation, my position here, it complicates things." "Only if we let it," Alexander replied. "I hired you because you're qualified, and because this company needs your perspective. The fact that I care about you personally is separate from that professional decision." "Is it, though?" Sarah challenged gently. "Can you honestly say you would have created this position and hired me if we hadn't met the way we did?" Alexander considered her question seriously. "Perhaps not with the same timing," he admitted. "But the foundation and this department were inevitable once I started remembering what matters to me. You and Emma accelerated that process, but you didn't create it." Before Sarah could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed urgently. He glanced at it with a frown. "The board is assembling for an emergency session. I have to go." He hesitated, then added, "We'll continue this conversation over dinner, unless you'd prefer to reschedule." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Dinner is fine. We should talk this through properly." After Alexander left to confront Richard and attend the emergency board meeting, Sarah tried to refocus on the department materials, but Richard's words kept intruding. Was she simply a replacement family for a grieving man? Was Emma just a surrogate for the son he had lost? The questions haunted her through the afternoon as she met with her team and reviewed tenant cases. By 5 o'clock, she had made notes on several immediate initiatives she wanted to implement, focusing on preventive assistance for tenants facing financial hardship. She was gathering her things to leave when Megan appeared at her door. "Mr. Mitchell asked me to let you know that the board meeting is running long. He'll meet you at Sorrelina at 7 instead of 6, if that works for you." "That's fine," Sarah replied, grateful for the extra time to collect her thoughts. When she arrived at the upscale Italian restaurant near Copley Square, Alexander was already waiting, looking tired but relieved to see her. He stood as she approached, kissing her cheek in greeting, a gesture that felt both natural and thrilling. "I'm sorry about the delay," he said as they were seated. "The board meeting was contentious." "Richard?" Sarah guessed. Alexander nodded grimly. "He moved to suspend the foundation initiative pending further financial analysis. It was a transparent attempt to undermine the project." "What happened?" "I reminded the board that as majority shareholder, I have final authority on philanthropic initiatives," Alexander replied, a hint of steel in his voice. "The foundation proceeds as planned." Sarah studied him across the candlelit table, seeing both the powerful CEO and the vulnerable man beneath the polished exterior. "Alexander, we need to talk about what Richard said." "Richard was out of line," Alexander stated flatly. "He had no right to approach you that way. But were his concerns entirely unfounded?" Sarah pressed gently. "The timing of all this, us meeting, the changes you're making at the company, our growing his closeness, it's a lot in a very short time." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering her words as the waiter poured their wine. When they were alone again, he spoke with careful deliberation. 3 years ago, I lost everything that mattered to me. I buried myself in work, in acquisition and expansion because numbers and deals don't hurt. I became exactly the kind of businessman my father warned me against becoming. Someone who saw properties instead of homes, leases instead of lives. He reached across the table to take her hand. "Meeting you and Emma didn't remind me of what I lost, Sarah. It reminded me of who I was supposed to be. The foundation, the tenant relations department, these aren't grief projects. They're course corrections." Sarah felt the truth of his words but still hesitated. "And us? Where do Emma and I fit into this course correction?" Alexander's eyes held hers with unwavering certainty. "Wherever you want to fit. I care about you, Sarah, both of you, not as replacements or stand-ins, but as the remarkable individuals you are. Emma makes me laugh for the first time in years. You challenge me to be better than I am. That has nothing to do with grief and everything to do with who you are. The raw honesty in his voice brought tears to Sarah's eyes. I care about you too, she admitted softly. And that terrifies me, because Emma is already so attached to you. If this doesn't work out, I understand, Alexander said, squeezing her hand. We can take this as slowly as you need. Emma's well-being comes first. We both agree on that. The rest of dinner passed in easier conversation, discussing Sarah's first impressions of the company and her ideas for the department. Alexander listened attentively, clearly valuing her insights and perspective. By dessert, the tension had dissolved into comfortable companionship, punctuated by moments of connection that felt increasingly natural. As they walked to where Alexander's driver waited, Sarah found herself thinking of Emma, who was spending the evening with her favorite babysitter. Emma asked this morning if you were coming for dinner again soon. She wants to show you her school project on butterflies. Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. I'd love to see it. Perhaps tomorrow night. That would be nice, Sarah replied, finding she meant it completely. At her door, Alexander hesitated. About what Richard said. I think we've covered that sufficiently, Sarah interrupted gently. I know who you are, Alexander, and I'm beginning to understand what we might be to each other. Acting on impulse, she leaned up and kissed him softly on the lips, a brief but deliberate gesture that left them both slightly breathless. Good night, she whispered, slipping inside before he could respond. Sarah leaned against the closed door, her heart racing with something that felt remarkably like hope. Whatever complications lay ahead, Richard's opposition, workplace politics, the uncertainties of building a relationship with a man still carrying deep wounds, she knew with sudden clarity that Alexander Mitchell was worth the risk. Her phone buzzed with a text message from him. Thank you for today, for everything. I'll see you tomorrow. Simple words, but they carried the weight of promise, of dinners and picnics, of professional collaboration and personal connection, of a future neither of them could have imagined just weeks ago. As Sarah paid the babysitter and checked on a sleeping Emma, she found herself imagining a life where Alexander's steady presence was a constant, where Emma's innocent question about marriage wasn't merely a child's fantasy. The possibility both thrilled and frightened her. She kissed Emma's forehead gently, careful not to wake her. Sweet dreams, sweetheart, she whispered. Emma stirred slightly, hugging her teddy bear and ducked closer. Did Mr. Alexander like the butterflies? She murmured sleepily. He's coming to see them tomorrow, Sarah promised. Emma smiled without opening her eyes. Good. I told Teddy he would. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, marveling at the simple faith of a child who had already decided that Alexander belonged in their lives. Perhaps, Sarah thought as she turned out the light, Emma's instincts were right. Perhaps Alexander Mitchell was exactly where he was meant to be, with them. The weeks that followed brought a gentle rhythm to their lives. Alexander became a regular presence at the Parker apartment, arriving most evenings with groceries or takeout, staying to help Emma with homework, or to discuss foundation plans with Sarah. Weekends found them exploring Boston together, visits to the Children's Museum, walks along the Freedom Trail, impromptu picnics when the weather permitted. To the outside world, Alexander Mitchell remained the formidable CEO of Mitchell Enterprises. But those closest to him noticed the changes. He smiled more. He listened more carefully in meetings. He began leaving the office at reasonable hours, delegating tasks he once would have handled personally. Richard Harrington watched these changes with growing concern, cataloguing each deviation from Alexander's established patterns, like evidence in a case he was building. The Tenant Relations Department was flourishing under Sarah's direction, implementing programs that were gaining positive media attention and improving tenant retention rates. The Mitchell Foundation moved forward, despite Richard's attempts to delay it, with incorporation papers filed and a board of trustees being assembled. On a bright November morning, Alexander stood at the window of his office, watching Boston Harbor sparkle in the sunlight. 3 months had passed since he'd first knocked on the door of apartment 2B, 3 months that had transformed him in ways he was still discovering. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Victoria Adams entered, carrying a tablet and a troubled expression. "Alex, we need to talk. About the riverfront expansion," he asked, gesturing for her to sit. "I've reviewed the projections, and I think we should reconsider the affordable housing component." "Not about riverfront," Victoria interrupted. "About Richard. He's called for another special board meeting tomorrow. The agenda isn't specified, but my sources tell me he's making a serious play this time." Alexander sighed, unsurprised. He's been building to this for weeks. "This is different," Victoria warned. "He's been meeting privately with major shareholders. Whatever he's planning, he believes he has the votes. He can't force me out without my shares," Alexander reminded her. As majority shareholder, his position was technically secure. "No, but he can make things extremely difficult if he has enough board support." Victoria hesitated, then added, "There's something else. He's been investigating Sarah." Alexander's expression hardened. "What do you mean investigating?" "Background checks, financial history, employment records, looking for something he can use." "Sarah's life is an open book," Alexander said confidently. "She has nothing to hide." Victoria's discomfort was evident. "Alex, I think he's found something. I don't know what, but he seems very certain of his position." A cold feeling settled in Alexander's stomach. "Keep me informed of anything else." "You hear?" he said, his voice controlled despite the anger building within him. "And Victoria, thank you for your loyalty." After she left, Alexander tried to focus on work, but found his thoughts continually returning to Victoria's warning. What could Richard possibly have discovered about Sarah that would give him leverage? The question haunted him through meetings and conference calls until, unable to concentrate further, he decided to leave early. The late autumn afternoon was turning to dusk as Alexander's car pulled up outside Sarah's building. Emma would be at her after-school program for another hour, giving him time to speak with Sarah privately about Richard's maneuvering. He was about to text her when the building's front door opened and a man emerged, tall, in his mid-30s, with the kind of casual good looks that suggested minimal effort. The man glanced at Alexander's car, then continued down the street with a confident stride. Something about him tugged at Alexander's memory, a vague sense of recognition he couldn't place. Dismissing the feeling, he entered the building and made his way to apartment 2B. Sarah answered his knock with evident surprise. "Alexander, I wasn't expecting you until dinner." "I finished early and thought I'd help with dinner preparations," he explained, noticing immediately that something was off. Sarah's eyes were slightly red, her smile forced. "Is everything all right?" "Of course," she said too quickly, stepping back to let him enter. "Just a hectic day. The rent assistance program launch is more complicated than we anticipated." Alexander studied her carefully as he hung up his coat. The apartment seemed different somehow, tidier than usual, with Emma's toys conspicuously absent from their usual places in the living room. "Sarah," he said gently, "who was the man I just saw leaving your building?" Her hand froze on the refrigerator door, her back to him. "For you saw him?" "Tall, dark hair, leather jacket. He was coming out as I arrived." Sarah closed the refrigerator without taking anything out, her shoulders slumped slightly. "That was Jason, Emma's father." The revelation hit Alexander with unexpected force. "Jason? I thought he hadn't been in contact for years." "He hasn't," Sarah confirmed, turning to face him, "until last week. He called out of the blue, saying he wanted to see Emma." Alexander struggled to keep his expression neutral despite the sudden anxiety gripping him. "What did you tell him?" "That he gave up that right when he walked out on us," Sarah replied, a flash of anger in her eyes. "But then he said he's been in therapy, that he's changed, that he regrets abandoning us. He wants to make amends." "And you believe him?" Alexander couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Sarah sighed, moving to sit on the couch. "I don't know what to believe. He seems different, but Jason was always good at seeming things he wasn't." Alexander joined, her careful to maintain a respectful distance, despite his instinct to pull her close. "Why didn't you tell me he'd contacted you?" "Because I didn't want it to be real," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "If I told you, it would mean acknowledging that he's actually back in our lives, and I wasn't ready for that." "Has he seen Emma yet?" Sarah shook her head firmly. No, I told him I needed time to think about it, to decide what's best for her. He's been surprisingly respectful of that boundary. Alexander chose his next words carefully. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Richard has been investigating you, looking into your background, your history. Her head snapped up. What? Why? He's making another play for control of the company. I think he's looking for anything he can use against me, including my relationship with you. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. And now Jason shows up out of nowhere after years of silence. She stood, pacing the small living room. Do you think Richard found him? Encouraged him to come back? It's possible, Alexander acknowledged, the pieces fitting together in a troubling pattern. Richard has resources, and he's determined to prove that my judgment is compromised. What does he think Jason can do? I'm legally Emma's sole guardian. He has no rights after abandoning us. Alexander hesitated. He could create complications. Public relations issues for the company, questions about your focus at work. At minimum, he could cause emotional distress for you and Emma. Sarah's face paled. Emma. Oh God, Alexander. What if he tries to take her? He could file for shared custody, claim he's reformed, drag us through court. That won't happen, Alexander said firmly, rising to take her hands in his. I won't let it happen. We have resources too, Sarah. The front door opened before she could respond, and Emma burst in, her face lighting up when she saw Alexander. Mr. Alexander, you're early. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist in an enthusiastic hug. Alexander lifted her up, his heart constricting at the absolute trust in her embrace. I thought I'd help with dinner tonight. How was school? As Emma launched into an elaborate description of her day, Sarah mouthed later to Alexander over her daughter's head. He nodded, understanding that their conversation would have to wait until Emma was asleep. Dinner was a subdued affair despite Emma's cheerful chatter. Sarah moved through the motions of their evening routine with mechanical precision, her mind clearly elsewhere. Alexander did his best to keep Emma engaged, reading her favorite story at bedtime with special attention to all the character voices she loved. Mr. Alexander, Emma said sleepily as he tucked her blanket around her, are you going to stay with us forever? The innocent question pierced straight to his heart. I hope to be in your life for a very long time, Emma. Good, she murmured, already drifting towards sleep. I told Teddy you belong with us now. Alexander kissed her forehead gently. Teddy is very wise. When he returned to the living room, Sarah was sitting at the small dining table, a glass of wine untouched before her. She's asleep, he reported, taking the seat across from her. Alexander, Sarah began, her voice tight with tension, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. What can Richard do? What might Jason do? I need to be prepared. Alexander reached for her hand across the table. First, let me be clear. Whatever happens, you and Emma will be protected. I have resources that Richard can't touch, and I'll use every one of them if necessary. Sarah nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders at his reassurance. Jason said he's living in Boston now. He has a job in sales, an apartment in Somerville. He seemed stable, but I don't trust it. He was stable before, until Emma was born, and parenthood became real rather than theoretical. Has he asked for anything specific? Money? Legal recognition? Just to see Emma, Sarah replied. He says he wants to apologize to her, to start building a relationship. But it feels too convenient, especially now that you mention Richard's investigation. Alexander considered his next words carefully. We should prepare for the possibility that Jason's return isn't coincidental. If Richard is involved, he may have promised Jason something in exchange for creating complications. Using a child as a pawn, Sarah said bitterly. That's despicable, even for corporate politics. Richard is desperate, Alexander explained. The Foundation threatens everything he values about the company. Profit margins, aggressive expansion, shareholder primacy. Your influence represents a fundamental shift in direction that he can't accept. Sarah's eyes met his, a new determination in their depths. Then we fight back, starting with finding out if Jason and Richard have connected. Alexander nodded, already formulating a plan. I'll have my security team look into it discreetly. In the meantime, I think we should consider additional precautions. For Emma, changing her pickup routine at school, possibly adding security here at the apartment. You think it could get that serious? I hope not, Alexander replied honestly, but I'd rather be over-prepared than caught off guard. Sarah was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her wine glass with one finger. There's something else you should know, she said finally. Something that might be relevant if Richard is digging into my past. Alexander waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. When Emma was about a year old, after Jason left, I struggled. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Financially, emotionally, there was a period of about 3 months when we lived in my car. I couldn't afford rent, and the shelters were full. Alexander felt a surge of protective anger at the thought of Sarah and baby Emma homeless, vulnerable. That's nothing to be ashamed of, Sarah. You survived an impossible situation. I know, she said, meeting his gaze directly. But during that time I made some choices I'm not proud of. Nothing illegal, she added quickly, seeing his expression. But I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have. I missed court dates for traffic tickets because I couldn't afford to pay them. My credit was destroyed. I'm still rebuilding it even now. None of that matters, Alexander assured her, squeezing her hand. It might to Richard, Sarah pointed out. He could paint me as financially irresponsible, unstable. He could use it to question my qualifications for my position. Alexander shook his head firmly. Your past struggles make you more qualified, not less. You understand firsthand what our tenants might be facing. Sarah smiled faintly at his unwavering support. There's one more thing. Jason doesn't know about you, about us. When he came today, I didn't mention that I'm seeing someone. Why not? Alexander asked, genuinely curious rather than offended. Instinct, I suppose. I didn't want to give him any more information than necessary, until I understand what he really wants. Sarah hesitated, and I was afraid it might provoke him. Jason always had a jealous streak even after he left. The idea of another man in Emma's life might trigger complications. Alexander processed this information, adding it to the complex equation they were facing. We should be strategic then. For now, keep things as they are. Don't volunteer information about our relationship, but don't lie if he asks directly. Sarah nodded, then suddenly looked exhausted, the weight of the situation settling visibly on her shoulders. I'm so sorry, Alexander. You've already been through so much, and now this drama— Stop, he interrupted gently. This isn't your fault. None of it is, and we'll handle it together. He moved around the table to kneel beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. Sarah Parker, I want to be absolutely clear about something. I'm not going anywhere. Not because of Richard, not because of Jason, not because of anything in your past. I'm here because I choose to be here with you and Emma. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to break down. I'm scared, Alexander. Not just of losing my job or facing scandal. I'm scared of losing what we've built together. These past months they've given Emma and me something we never thought we'd have, a sense of family, of belonging. You haven't just built that for yourselves, Alexander said softly. You've built it for me too. After Catherine and James, I never thought I'd feel this way again, part of something that matters more than acquisitions or developments or shareholder value. Sarah leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. So what do we do now? Now, Alexander said, his voice calm and certain, we prepare. We gather information, we protect Emma, and we face whatever comes together. And tomorrow I go to that board meeting and remind Richard exactly who built Mitchell Enterprises. Later that night, as Sarah slept beside him in the narrow bed, Alexander lay awake, planning strategy and contingencies. The thought of Jason Turner inserting himself into Emma's life filled him with a visceral dread. Not just for the complications it would create, but for the pain it might cause her, the confusion, the false hopes, the potential disappointment. In just 3 months, Emma had become as precious to him as if she were his own child. The thought of anyone hurting her, even her biological father, awakened a fierce protectiveness he had only felt once before, for James. Alexander gently extricated himself from Sarah's sleeping form and moved to the doorway of Emma's room, watching the rise and fall of her small chest as she slumbered peacefully, unaware of the adult complications swirling around her. Teddy Bear was clutched in one arm, the duck Alexander had given her in the other. "I'll keep you safe," he whispered, a promise to the sleeping child and to himself. "Both of you, whatever it takes." As he returned to bed, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. Marcus Chen. "Emergency meeting tomorrow moved to 9 a.m. Richard has distributed materials to board members in advance. Content unknown but tone described as explosive. Wanted you to know. Stay strong." Alexander set the phone aside without replying. Whatever Richard had planned, whatever he thought he had discovered about Sarah or their relationship, Alexander was ready to fight. Not just for his company, but for the family he had unexpectedly, miraculously found. Sarah stirred beside him, reaching for him in her sleep. Alexander gathered her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady rhythm of her heart against his. 3 months ago, he had been a ghost drifting through his own life. Now, he was anchored by love, a love he would defend with everything he had. 6 months later, Boston bloomed with the vibrant colors of spring. Cherry blossoms lined Commonwealth Avenue, their delicate pink petals drifting on the breeze like nature's confetti. In the public garden, tulips and daffodils created a kaleidoscope of color around the lagoon, where the famous swan boats glided across the water, carrying tourists and locals alike. At the edge of the garden, a small gathering assembled beneath a white pergola, draped with ivy and white roses. Though modest in size, only 50 guests, the collection of people represented both worlds that had collided and merged in the past 9 months. Executives from Mitchell Enterprises mingled with teachers from Emma's school. Sarah's colleagues from the Tenant Relations Department chatted with residents from the Winchester Street building, all united by their connection to the couple at the center of it all. Emma Parker, soon to be Emma Mitchell, twirled in her flower girl dress, a confection of ivory satin and lace that matched the simple elegance of her mother's wedding gown. Her golden curls had been arranged in an intricate crown of braids, interwoven with baby's breath and tiny roses, making her look like a fairy princess from one of her beloved storybooks. "Do I look pretty enough, Ms. Wilson?" she asked her kindergarten teacher, who had been invited at Emma's insistent request. "You look absolutely magical," Ms. Wilson assured her, straightening the small basket of rose petals Emma would scatter down the aisle. "Your mom and Mr. Alexander will be so proud." Emma beamed, clutching her basket with one hand and Teddy Bear, sporting a tiny bow tie for the occasion, with the other. "Alexander says he's going to be my real dad now. Not just my heart dad, but my legal dad too." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Ms. Wilson replied, touched by the child's simple articulation of adoption. "He's very lucky to have you. And I'm lucky to have him," Emma stated with the absolute certainty of a 6-year-old who had never doubted, even from that first meeting, that Alexander Mitchell belonged in her life. Teddy knew it right away. That's why he didn't mind when I offered him to Alexander that day. In a tent set up as a temporary dressing area, Sarah stood before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the woman reflected back at her. The ivory sheath dress was far simpler than traditional wedding gowns, but its elegant lines and exquisite tailoring spoke of quiet luxury. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, adorned only with a single gardenia over one ear, Catherine's favorite flower, a subtle tribute that had been Alexander's suggestion. Victoria Adams, who had become a close friend and ally in the months since Richard's departure, adjusted the small train. "You look absolutely breathtaking, Sarah. Alexander won't know what hit him." Sarah smiled, still occasionally overwhelmed by the turn her life had taken. "A year ago, I was facing eviction and unemployment. Now I'm getting married in the public garden with the mayor of Boston in attendance. It doesn't seem real sometimes." "It's real," Victoria assured her, handing her the bouquet of white roses and lavender, "and well-deserved. What you've accomplished with the Tenant Relations Department and the Foundation has been remarkable." The Mitchell Foundation for Housing Security had launched 3 months earlier to significant media attention, already providing assistance to over 200 families facing housing insecurity across Boston. The model was being studied by real estate companies in other cities, prompting discussions about corporate responsibility in the housing sector nationwide. "I had help," Sarah acknowledged. "Alexander's vision for the foundation, went far beyond anything I could have imagined. You inspired that vision, Victoria reminded her. You and Emma changed him in ways none of us thought possible after he lost Catherine and James. A knock at the tent entrance interrupted their conversation. Marcus Chen peeked in, his expression warm. It's time, Sarah. Everyone's ready, and Alexander is practically vibrating with anticipation at the altar. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. How's Emma? Is she ready? She's giving the ring bearer very serious instructions about proper petal-to-step ratios for optimal flower distribution, Marcus reported with a straight face. The poor boy looks terrified of getting the math wrong. Sarah laughed, the last of her nervousness dissolving in the mental image of her daughter's characteristic intensity. That sounds about right. Let's not keep them waiting. Meanwhile, at the pergola that served as their altar, Alexander Mitchell stood with his best man, Thomas, his longtime driver, who had become a trusted friend and confidant through the years. The simple gold band in Thomas's pocket represented not just Alexander's commitment to Sarah, but his promise to Emma as well, a family forged not through blood, but through choice and love. Nervous? Thomas asked quietly as they watched guests take their seats. Alexander considered the question. Not about marrying Sarah, he replied honestly, but about being worthy of the family we're creating. Every day. Thomas nodded in understanding. Catherine would be happy for you. James too. I think so, Alexander agreed, his eyes momentarily distant. It took me a long time to understand that loving them and loving Sarah and Emma aren't mutually exclusive. That my heart could expand rather than replace. The conversation ended as the string quartet began playing, signaling the start of the ceremony. Guests rose, turning expectantly toward the white carpet that formed an aisle between rows of white chairs. Emma appeared first, her face a study in concentration as she carefully scattered rose petals at precise intervals. When she spotted Alexander waiting at the altar, her serious expression bloomed into a radiant smile that hit him with the force of physical impact. She gave him a little wave before continuing her methodical petal distribution, followed by a nervous-looking boy carrying a pillow with Emma's ring, a delicate band that would complement Sarah's engagement diamond. Then the music changed, and Sarah appeared on Marcus Chen's arm, having asked him to give her away in the absence of family. Alexander's breath caught at the sight of her, not just her physical beauty, which was considerable, but the strength and grace she embodied, the quiet dignity that had first impressed him when he knocked on her door 9 months ago. As she moved toward him, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The pain of losing Catherine and James would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. Sarah and Emma had shown him that love wasn't finite, that the heart could heal and expand, making room for new joy without diminishing what came before. When Sarah reached the altar, Marcus placed her hand in Alexander's with a formal nod before taking his seat. Emma immediately positioned herself beside them, reaching up to hold both their hands and completing the circle of their small family. The officiant, a judge who had been Alexander's father's friend, smiled at the tableau before beginning the ceremony. Friends and family, we gather today to celebrate not just the union of Alexander and Sarah, but the creation of a family that reminds us all that love can find us in the most unexpected places, at the most unexpected times. The ceremony itself was brief but deeply personal. Alexander and Sarah had written their own vows, each speaking from the heart about the journey that had brought them together. Sarah, Alexander began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. 9 months ago, I came to your door as a man who had forgotten how to live. I had built walls around my heart so high and so thick that I thought nothing could breach them. Then a little girl offered me her teddy bear, and a woman faced me with dignity and courage, despite impossible circumstances. He squeezed her hands gently. You didn't tear down my walls, you showed me the door I had forgotten existed. You and Emma reminded me that a life without connection isn't a life at all, it's merely existence. I promise to honor the trust you've placed in me, to be a partner worthy of your strength, and to be the father Emma deserves. My heart, my home, my life, they're yours now and always. Sarah blinked back tears as she began her own vows. Alexander, when you first knocked on our door, I saw only the landlord coming to evict us. I had no idea I was meeting the man who would change our lives in ways I couldn't imagine. You saw us, really saw us, when others looked past. You recognized our dignity when others saw only our circumstances. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. I promise to stand beside you as we build not just our family, but the vision of a more compassionate world that we share. I promise to remind you of your own goodness on the days you might forget it. And I promise that Emma and I will fill your life with so much love that the empty spaces will echo with laughter instead of silence. When the time came for rings, Emma proudly presented each one, her face solemn with the importance of her role. As Alexander slipped the wedding band onto Sarah's finger, he spoke the traditional words with profound meaning. With this ring, I thee wed. Sarah repeated the gesture and the words, the simple gold band gleaming against Alexander's skin, a visible symbol of the connection that had transformed both their lives. And now, the judge said, smiling broadly, by the authority vested in me by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. As Alexander and Sarah shared their first kiss as a married couple, Emma clapped her hands in delight, then tugged at Alexander's suit jacket. Laughing, he lifted her into his arms, including her in their embrace as applause erupted from the gathered guests. We're officially a family now, Emma announced to everyone within earshot as they made their way back down the aisle. Teddy says it's about time. The reception was held in a tent erected at the edge of the garden, its transparent panels allowing views of the lagoon while protecting against the spring breeze. Inside, tables adorned with wildflowers and candles created an atmosphere of natural elegance. At the center of the main table sat a small, framed photograph of Catherine and James, a touchstone of remembrance amid the celebration of new beginnings. Dinner was served, toasts were made, and as the evening progressed, Alexander found a moment to step outside with Sarah, both of them needing a brief respite from the joyful chaos. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, testing the name as he pulled her close. How does it sound? Perfect, she replied, leaning into his embrace, though I think someone else is even more excited about her new name than I am. They both glanced back toward the tent, where Emma was demonstrating her dance moves to an admiring circle of guests, her flower girl dress swirling around her as she twirled. The adoption hearing is next week, Alexander reminded her. Then it's official for all of us. Sarah nodded, her expression softening. She's been practicing writing Emma Mitchell for months. Her kindergarten teacher says all her school papers come back with her new name in the corner, even though we've explained she needs to wait for the legal process. Alexander laughed. She's nothing if not determined. Like her father, Sarah observed, watching his face carefully. Her new father, I mean. Alexander's eyes glistened slightly in the twilight. I never thought I'd hear those words again, he admitted quietly. After James. I couldn't imagine being anyone's father ever again. You've been her father in every way that matters since that day at the picnic, Sarah said, reaching up to touch his face. The adoption just makes official what's already true in her heart. From inside the tent came the sound of Emma calling for them, her voice carrying the slight edge of a child who had been patient long enough. Mom, Dad? It's time for the special dance. Everyone's waiting. Dad. The simple word still had the power to stop Alexander's breath each time Emma used it, which she had begun doing immediately after he proposed, seeing no reason to wait for legal formalities. We're coming. Sweetheart, he called back, offering his arm to Sarah with a smile. Shall we, Mrs. Mitchell? Our daughter awaits. Inside, the band began playing the song they had chosen for their first dance as a family, not just Alexander and Sarah as newlyweds, but Emma too, the three of them moving together in a circle that symbolized their unity. As Alexander lifted Emma into his arms, her small hands resting on his and Sarah's shoulders, he felt a sense of completion that transcended anything he had known before. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep in a suite at the Four Seasons, where they would spend the night before leaving for a brief honeymoon, with Emma joining them. Of course, they wouldn't have it any other way. Alexander and Sarah stood at the window overlooking Boston Harbor. I never thanked you properly, Alexander said suddenly, his arms wrapped around Sarah from behind as they watched the moonlight play across the water. For what? She asked, leaning back against his chest. For the teddy bear, he replied simply. The one Emma offered me that first day. It seems like such a small thing, but it changed everything." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "She knew before either of us," she said softly. "Children have a way of seeing through all our careful defenses." "She did," Alexander agreed. "From that first moment, she saw not the businessman or the landlord, but the man underneath who had forgotten how to live." He brushed a strand of hair from Sarah's face. "And you saw him too, even when I was trying my hardest to hide him." "I love that man," Sarah whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him gently. "The businessman, the landlord, the philanthropist, they're all part of you. But the man who sits on the floor to play board games with Emma, who reads her stories with all the character voices, who holds me when the world feels too heavy, that's the man I married today." Alexander held her close, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment, from that first knock on apartment 2B to this harbor view. Sweet from the threat of eviction to the promise of forever, it seemed both impossible and inevitable, a story too perfect to be anything but true. "Tomorrow we start our honeymoon," he murmured against her hair. "And when we come back, we move into our new home. Not my mansion or your apartment, but our house, the one we chose together." The house in question was a brownstone in Back Bay, large enough for comfort, but modest enough to feel like a true home rather than a showplace. Emma had already claimed the room with the window seat for her library, announcing that Teddy Bear needed proper shelves for his book collection. "And the foundation headquarters opens next month," Sarah added, excitement evident in her voice despite her fatigue. "The first families move into the transitional housing wing in 6 weeks." The Mitchell Foundation campus represented everything they had built together, not just as a couple, but as partners in a vision for what housing security could mean in Boston and beyond. The renovated warehouse in a once struggling neighborhood now housed not only the foundation offices, but also 20 apartment units for families transitioning from homelessness, along with childcare facilities, job training resources, and financial counseling services. "We've come so far in 9 months," Alexander reflected. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it." "I can," Sarah said with quiet confidence. "Once you remembered who you were meant to be, everything else followed naturally." From the adjoining room came the sound of Emma stirring, followed by her sleepy voice calling, "Dad." "Are you there?" "Always," Alexander replied, moving immediately toward the sound of his daughter. "I'm right here, Emma. Always right here." As he settled beside Emma's bed, soothing her brief moment of disorientation in the unfamiliar hotel room, Sarah watched from the doorway. The sight of her daughter and husband together, Emma's small hand trustingly held in Alexander's larger one, filled her with a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. 9 months ago, she had been a struggling single mother facing eviction, and Alexander had been a grieving widower, entombed in wealth but starved for meaning. Their collision, precipitated by 3 months of overdue rent and a well-loved teddy bear, had created not just a family but a ripple of change that would touch hundreds of lives through the foundation. They had built together. "Everything okay?" Alexander asked softly as he rejoined her after Emma had fallen back asleep. Sarah nodded, leaning into his embrace. "Everything is perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." And as they stood together in the moonlight, Sarah and Alexander Mitchell, along with their daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, embodied the truth that sometimes the greatest fortunes have nothing to do with wealth at all, but rather with the courage to open one's heart to love again. After all, as Emma had reminded them in her own way, the most valuable possessions aren't measured in dollars or deeds, but in the treasures of the heart, like a well-loved teddy bear, offered freely to save a home, and in doing so saving a soul as well.